Welcome to Champion Stories. If this is your first time here, subscribe now and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. And now, on to today's story. The mountain air of Baguio cut through the evening like a blade, carrying with it the crisp scent of pine trees and the distant echo of jeepney engines navigating the winding roads. December had settled over the summer capital of the Philippines with an unusual intensity, bringing temperatures that made even the locals reach for their warmest clothes. Street vendors wrapped themselves in multiple layers while serving steaming bowls of lugo to hurried pedestrians, their breath visible in small clouds as they called out to potential customers. Manny Pacquiao pulled his black leather jacket tighter around his shoulders as he walked down Session Road, the main thoroughfare that pulsed with the heartbeat of the mountain city. He had come to Baguio not for training or business, but for something far more personal, a quiet moment of reflection away from the chaos of Manila, away from the cameras and the endless demands of his public life. The cool mountain air had always helped him think, had always brought him back to the essence of who he was beneath all the fame and accolades. The fighting senator moved with the same quiet grace that had made him a legend in the ring, his steps deliberate but unhurried. Few people recognized him in the dim streetlight, bundled as he was in casual clothes, a simple baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. This anonymity was precious to him. These moments when he could simply be a man walking through the world, observing life unfold around him without being the center of attention. As he passed a small sari-sari store, the warm yellow light spilling from its windows illuminated the weathered face of Teodoro, an elderly store owner arranging packages of instant noodles on his counter. The old man wore only a thin cotton shirt and worn slippers, his arms crossed tightly against his chest as he tried to ward off the cold. Manny noticed how the man's hands trembled slightly, not from age, but from the biting mountain air that seemed to grow colder with each passing hour. Further down the street, near the entrance to Burnham Park, a figure caught Manny's attention. Sitting on a concrete bench was a young man, perhaps in his early 20s, wearing nothing but a faded t-shirt and torn jeans. His name was Izagani, though Manny wouldn't learn this until much later. The stranger sat hunched forward, his arms wrapped around his knees, his entire body shaking with each gust of wind that swept down from the surrounding mountains. What struck Manny most wasn't the young man's obvious discomfort, but the quiet dignity with which he endured it. There was no self-pity in his posture, no dramatic gestures seeking attention from passers-by. He simply sat there, weathering the cold with the same stoic acceptance that Manny had seen in countless Filipinos throughout his life, the ability to endure hardship without complaint, to find strength in silence. The busy street continued its evening rhythm around them. Jeepneys rumbled past, their colorful decorations barely visible in the growing darkness. Groups of college students hurried toward the nearby university, their laughter mixing with the sound of tricycle motors and the distant music from a karaoke bar. Street food vendors wheeled their carts toward warmer spots, the smoke from their grills adding to the mountain mist that was beginning to settle over the city. Manny slowed his pace, his champion's instincts detecting something that others missed, the subtle signs of someone truly in need. The young man's lips had taken on a blue tinge, and his breathing came in short, visible puffs. This wasn't someone seeking attention or playing for sympathy. This was genuine suffering, quiet and uncomplaining, hidden in plain sight on a busy street where hundreds of people passed without truly seeing. The moment crystallized in Manny's mind with perfect clarity, the way critical seconds in a fight often did, when time seemed to slow and every detail became sharp and significant. Without conscious thought, Manny's feet carried him toward the bench where Izagani sat trembling in the mountain cold. Each step felt deliberate, as if guided by an invisible force that connected all struggling souls across the archipelago. The champion boxer had learned long ago that true strength wasn't measured by the power of one's punch, but by the willingness to extend a hand when no cameras were watching, when no crowds were cheering, when there was nothing to gain except the quiet satisfaction of human kindness. The young man didn't notice Manny's approach at first, too focused on trying to generate warmth through small and controlled movements. His shoulders rose and fell in a rhythm that spoke of practiced endurance, the kind that came from countless nights spent in similar circumstances. Isagani's dark eyes stared ahead toward the park's entrance, where couples and families strolled past in their warm coats and jackets, their comfort a stark contrast to his own situation. As Manny drew closer, he could see the details that painted the full picture of this stranger's struggle. The young man's sneakers had holes near the toes, patched with what appeared to be electrical tape. His jeans, though clean, showed the wear patterns of someone who owned few clothes and wore them often. Most telling were his hands, calloused and strong, speaking of hard physical labor, yet gentle in the way they rested against his knees. The realization struck Manny with the force of a heavyweight blow. This young man wasn't homeless by choice or circumstance alone. He was working, struggling, fighting his own daily battles with the same determination that Manny had brought to every ring. The cold night had simply caught him unprepared, perhaps traveling from a job that ended late, perhaps saving every peso for family rather than spending it on warm clothes for himself. Manny stopped walking and began to remove his leather jacket. The garment had been a gift from Jinky years ago, purchased during one of their trips to America. It was expensive, well made, and had kept him warm through countless cold nights in training camps across the world. More importantly, it carried the warmth of love, the memory of his wife's smile when she had presented it to him, wrapped in tissue paper and tied with a silver ribbon. The cold air immediately bit into Manny's arms through his cotton shirt, but the discomfort felt insignificant compared to what he witnessed before him. He understood that this moment would define something essential about who he was when stripped of all the titles and all the fame, all the external validation that had shaped his public identity. This was a test of character that no referee would judge, no crowd would witness, no trophy would commemorate. Around them, the evening continued its natural progression. A group of teenagers passed by, their animated conversation about school and weekend plans, creating a bubble of youthful energy that contrasted sharply with the quiet desperation of the scene unfolding on the bench. An elderly woman named Clarita shuffled past, carrying a plastic bag filled with vegetables from the night market, her own thin shawl wrapped tightly around her shoulders as she hurried toward the warmth of her home. The streetlights cast long shadows across the pavement, creating a theater of light and darkness where this small drama played out. The scent of burning wood from nearby fireplaces mixed with the mountain air, carrying with it the promise of warmth and comfort that seemed so distant from where Isagani sat. Manny held his jacket in his hands, feeling its weight not just as fabric and leather, but as a symbol of everything he had been blessed to achieve. The garment represented success, comfort, security, luxuries that millions of his countrymen could only dream of possessing. Yet in this moment, it became something far more precious, a bridge between two human beings, a tangible expression of compassion that could transform a cold night into something beautiful. The decision crystallized completely in his heart, as clear and unshakable as his commitment had been in every championship fight he had ever entered. Manny approached the bench with the quiet confidence that had carried him through 8 weight divisions, but this moment required a different kind of courage than any he had ever shown in the ring. The leather jacket felt both weightless and monumentally heavy in his hands as he stood beside Isagani, who remained focused on his internal battle against the mountain cold. When the young man finally looked up, his eyes widened with the slow recognition that comes when reality shifts unexpectedly. The face before him was familiar from countless newspapers, television screens and billboards across the Philippines, yet seeing Manny Pacquiao standing there in the flesh on a cold night in Baguio seemed as surreal as a dream. Isagani's first instinct was to stand to show respect, but his body was too stiff from the cold to move quickly. Manny gently placed the jacket around Isagani's shoulders before the young man could fully process what was happening. The leather was still warm from Manny's body heat, and the sudden comfort brought an involuntary sigh of relief from Isagani's lips. The jacket was clearly expensive, far beyond anything the young man had ever owned, yet it settled around him as naturally as if it had been made specifically for his frame. The transformation was immediate and profound. Color began to return to Isagani's lips, and the violent shivering that had gripped his body gradually subsided. But more than the physical warmth, something deeper began to thaw within him, a sense of worth, of being seen and valued by another human being. The jacket carried with it not just heat, but dignity, transforming him from a figure to be pitied into someone deserving of kindness. Manny stepped back slightly, allowing the young man space to adjust to this unexpected gift. The champion boxer's own arms were now exposed to the cold air, but he felt none of the discomfort. Instead, a warmth spread through his chest that had nothing to do with external temperature. This feeling was familiar, yet always surprising. The profound satisfaction that came from knowing he had used his blessings to ease another's burden. Around them, the evening crowd continued its flow along Session Road, but several passers-by had begun to notice the scene unfolding on the bench. A middle-aged woman named Josefina slowed her pace, recognizing both the generosity of the gesture and the identity of the man making it. She clutched her shopping bag tighter, moved not by the celebrity of the moment, but by its pure humanity. Isagani's hands explored the jacket carefully, as if afraid it might disappear if he touched it too firmly. The leather was supple and perfectly maintained, the kind of quality that spoke of craftsmanship and care. Inside the jacket, he could feel the residual warmth and caught the faint scent of expensive cologne, mixed with something more personal, the unique essence of someone who had lived an extraordinary life. The young man's eyes filled with moisture that had nothing to do with the cold wind. Throughout his 23 years, he had grown accustomed to being invisible, to struggling alone with his burdens. He worked construction during the day when jobs were available, sent what money he could to his mother and younger sister in their barangay outside the city, and often found himself caught between shifts with nowhere warm to wait. Never had he imagined that his quiet suffering would be noticed, much less addressed with such immediate and generous action. The jacket represented more than protection from the elements. It was validation that his struggles mattered, that his dignity was worth preserving, that somewhere in the world was a person who understood the value of simple human kindness. Manny watched as the young man pulled the jacket closer around himself, noting how Isagani's posture began to straighten with renewed confidence. The champion had learned throughout his career that victory wasn't always measured in championship belts or prize money. Sometimes the greatest wins came in moments like this, when the measure of success was the relief in another person's eyes, the restoration of hope in a heart that had grown accustomed to disappointment. Manny settled onto the bench beside Isagani, the cold concrete immediately chilling through his cotton shirt, but he remained unbothered by the discomfort. The distance between them was respectful, yet close enough to share the moment's intimacy. The young man continued to marvel at the jacket's warmth, occasionally glancing sideways at his unexpected benefactor with a mixture of gratitude and disbelief that seemed to grow stronger with each passing minute. Without the need for formal introductions or explanations, the two men began to communicate in the universal language of shared humanity. Manny's presence alone conveyed understanding, while Isagani's grateful expression spoke volumes about struggles that words could never adequately capture. The champion boxer had always possessed an intuitive ability to read people, honed through years of studying opponents across the ring, and he could sense the depth of character in the young man beside him. Through subtle gestures and exchanged glances, Isagani began to share fragments of his story. He pointed toward the direction of the construction sites where he worked, his calloused hands indicating the nature of his labor. His eyes reflected the pride of honest work mixed with the frustration of inconsistent employment. When he gestured toward his worn phone and showed a photo of an elderly woman and a teenage girl, Manny understood immediately. Family responsibilities that drove every decision, every sacrifice, every cold night endured without complaint. The woman in the photo was Isagani's mother, Luzviminda, whose weathered face spoke of decades spent raising children alone after her husband's death in a fishing accident. The teenager was his sister Mayumi, bright-eyed and ambitious, currently in her final year of high school with dreams of attending college. Every peso Isagani earned went toward their small house in a remote barangay, toward medicine for his mother's arthritis, toward school supplies that would help his sister build a different kind of future. Manny nodded with deep recognition, remembering his own journey from poverty, his own family's struggles, the weight of being the one who carried everyone's hopes. He thought of his mother, Dionysia, of the countless sacrifices made by those who loved him before the world knew his name. The connection between his story and Isagani's formed an invisible bridge across the years, across the vast difference in their current circumstances. A group of young professionals walked past, their expensive coats and animated conversations about weekend plans creating a stark contrast to the quiet communion happening on the bench. One of them, a woman named Marilu, glanced back curiously, recognizing something significant in the scene, but unable to fully grasp its meaning. She continued walking, carrying with her an inexplicable sense that she had witnessed something important. The mountain wind continued its relentless push through the city streets, but now both men seemed insulated by more than mere clothing. Isagani's transformation was remarkable. The jacket had restored not just his physical comfort, but his sense of dignity. His posture had straightened, his breathing had steadied, and most importantly, the look of resignation in his eyes had been replaced by something resembling hope. Manny reached into his pocket and withdrew his wallet, but Isagani immediately shook his head with gentle firmness. The young man's refusal wasn't born from pride, but from understanding that the jacket itself was already far more than he could ever repay. He had learned to distinguish between charity that diminished and kindness that elevated, and this gesture clearly belonged to the latter category. Instead, Isagani pulled out his own worn wallet and showed Manny a small business card, his contact information for construction work, handwritten in careful letters. The gesture was his way of demonstrating that he wasn't someone who only took from the world, but someone who contributed, who had value to offer in return. It was a quiet assertion of dignity that Manny found deeply moving. The evening crowd began to thin as shops prepared to close and families headed home to warm dinners and comfortable beds. Street vendors wheeled their carts towards storage areas, their day's work complete, while the mountain city settled into its peaceful nighttime rhythm. As the night deepened around them, Manny knew their encounter was drawing to a natural close, but he sensed that this moment would extend far beyond the simple exchange of a jacket. The champion boxer had learned throughout his career that certain actions possessed a momentum of their own, creating ripples that spread in ways impossible to predict or control. Something about this quiet meeting on a Baguio bench felt like the beginning of one such wave. Isagani carefully stood from the bench, testing his newly warmed body against the mountain air. The jacket fit him perfectly, as if it had been waiting for exactly this moment to find its true purpose. He moved with renewed confidence, no longer the shivering figure that had caught Manny's attention earlier. The transformation was complete, yet somehow Manny understood that the real change was only just beginning. Before parting ways, Isagani did something unexpected. He removed a small wooden cross from his pocket, worn smooth by years of handling, and pressed it gently into Manny's palm. The gesture was made without ceremony or explanation, simply one man offering another the most precious thing he possessed. The cross had belonged to his father, carried through years of fishing expeditions before the accident that changed everything, and now it represented Isagani's gratitude in the only way he knew how to express it. Manny accepted the gift with the same grace he had shown in victory and defeat throughout his boxing career. The wooden cross was warm from being carried close to Isagani's heart, and its simplicity spoke of faith maintained through hardship, hope preserved despite disappointment. In his palm, it felt weightier than any championship belt he had ever earned. A security guard named Teodoro made his rounds through the area, his flashlight beams sweeping across empty benches and quiet walkways. When the light briefly illuminated the two men, he paused, recognizing something significant in their interaction. The guard had worked these streets for 15 years, had seen countless exchanges between strangers, but this moment carried a different quality that made him slow his pace and watch with respectful curiosity. As they prepared to go their separate ways, both men understood that their lives had been altered in ways that would only become clear with time. For Manny, the evening had reminded him of the fundamental truth that had driven every significant decision in his life, that real victory came not from defeating opponents, but from lifting up those who struggled. For Isagani, the encounter had restored something he hadn't even realized he had lost: the belief that kindness existed in the world, that strangers could care, that his dignity mattered to someone beyond his immediate family. The mountain wind carried with it the scent of pine trees and wood smoke as the two men walked in opposite directions, each carrying a piece of the other's story. Manny headed back toward his hotel, the wooden cross secure in his pocket, his mind already working through possibilities he hadn't considered before their meeting. The cold air bit through his cotton shirt, but he barely noticed, warmed by an inner fire that had been rekindled by the evening's events. Isagani walked toward the boarding house where he rented a small room, the leather jacket providing protection against both the elements and the uncertainty that had plagued him for months. With each step, he could feel the quality of the garment, could sense the care with which it had been maintained, could almost perceive the love that had motivated its original purchase. The jacket was more than clothing now. It was armor against despair, a tangible reminder that he was worth someone's concern. Behind them, the bench where they had shared their wordless conversation remained empty, but somehow changed. A young woman named Teresa passed by moments later, heading home from her job at a nearby restaurant. She paused at the bench, sensing something significant in the air. Though she couldn't identify what had happened there, the space seemed to hold an echo of human connection, of kindness passed between strangers, of the kind of moment that restored faith in humanity's capacity for goodness. The city of Baguio settled into its peaceful nighttime rhythm, but the energy of their encounter continued to resonate through the mountain air. 3 days after the encounter on Session Road, the story began to unfold in ways neither Manny nor Isagani could have anticipated. Teresa, the restaurant worker who had sensed something significant at the bench that night, became the first link in a chain of human connection that would stretch far beyond the mountain city of Baguio. She had mentioned the strange energy she felt near Burnham Park to her co-worker Josefina, who in turn shared it with her regular customers at the small eatery where they both worked. One of those customers was Bayani, a jeepney driver who had actually witnessed the encounter from his vehicle while waiting for passengers. He had recognized Manny immediately, but had chosen to respect the private moment rather than interrupt with requests for photos or autographs. Bayani's account of what he had seen spread through the transportation community like wildfire. Drivers gathered at their usual meeting spots shared the story with a mixture of pride and wonder. Pride that their boxing hero had demonstrated such humble kindness, and wonder that such gestures still existed in an increasingly disconnected world. The tale grew richer with each telling, not through exaggeration but through the addition of context that only those who understood struggle could provide. Meanwhile, Isagani continued his daily routine, but everything had changed. The leather jacket accompanied him to construction sites where his fellow workers, men named Hernando and Vicente, noticed the quality of his new clothing with curious eyes. When pressed for an explanation, Isagani simply smiled and mentioned meeting a kind stranger. He never revealed Manny's identity, understanding instinctively that some stories were too precious to be reduced to gossip or celebrity worship. The jacket's practical impact was immediate and profound. Isagani no longer spent his earnings on temporary warmth or hot drinks to fight the cold. Instead, every peso saved went directly toward his sister Mayumi's school expenses and his mother Luzviminda's medication. The simple act of kindness from a stranger had created a small but significant economic relief that rippled through his entire family structure. At the construction site, Isagani's improved condition didn't go unnoticed by his supervisor, Arturo, a fair man who had always respected the young worker's dedication. With better rest and protection from the elements, Isagani's productivity increased, earning him additional shifts and slightly higher pay. The jacket had become more than clothing. It was a catalyst for improved circumstances. Back in Manila, Manny found himself touched by memories of the encounter at unexpected moments. The wooden cross had taken up permanent residence in his pocket, a constant reminder of Isagani's quiet dignity and faith. During training sessions at his gym, he would often pause to touch the small wooden piece, drawing strength from the memory of genuine gratitude expressed without expectation of anything in return. The champion boxer began to see his city differently, noticing the countless individuals who struggled silently through their daily challenges. Street vendors who worked through cold nights, security guards who maintained their posts despite inadequate clothing, construction workers who built the nation's infrastructure while sacrificing their own comfort. Each face he encountered carried the potential for connection, for small acts of kindness that could transform lives in ways both subtle and profound. Word of the incident began to reach social media through indirect channels. A photographer named Edilberto, who frequented Baguio for landscape work, heard the story from multiple sources and shared a cryptic post about witnessing true humanity in action. He never mentioned names or specific details, but his followers sensed the authenticity in his words. The ripple effect continued to expand, touching lives in ways that defied measurement or quantification, creating a network of human connection rooted in a single moment of compassion. 2 weeks after the encounter in Baguio, Jinky Pacquiao noticed something different about her husband during their quiet Sunday morning together. As she prepared breakfast in their kitchen, she observed Manny sitting at the table. turning a small wooden object over in his hands with unusual reverence. The morning sunlight streaming through their windows caught the worn surface of what appeared to be a simple cross, polished smooth by years of handling. The absence of his favorite leather jacket hadn't escaped her attention either. Jinky had searched through his closets and asked their household staff about its whereabouts, but Manny had simply smiled and mentioned giving it to someone who needed it more. She knew her husband well enough to recognize the signs of a meaningful encounter, the way his eyes would take on a distant look when something had touched his heart deeply. At the construction site in Baguio, Isagani's transformation continued to inspire those around him. His supervisor, Arturo, had promoted him to lead a small crew, recognizing not just his improved performance, but the positive energy he brought to the work site. Fellow workers like Hernando and Vicente found themselves staying later to help complete projects, motivated by Isagani's example of quiet dedication and renewed hope. The young man had begun sharing his lunch with newer workers who couldn't afford proper meals, using the money he saved on warm clothing to extend small kindnesses to others. The leather jacket had become a symbol of possibility, proof that unexpected help could arrive at the darkest moments, encouraging everyone around him to believe in the potential for positive change. During evening video calls with his family, Isagani's mother, Luz Viminda, remarked on the brightness in his voice, though she couldn't identify its source. His sister, Mayumi, busy with her final year of high school, noticed that her brother's financial support had become more consistent, allowing her to participate in school activities she had previously considered impossible luxuries. Meanwhile, back in Manila, the story had begun to reach Manny's inner circle through unexpected channels. His son Jimuel heard fragments of it from friends who moved in social media circles, where the tale was spreading as an unnamed act of kindness by a mysterious Good Samaritan. The young Pacquiao was intrigued by the story's authentic feel, so different from the manufactured content that usually circulated online. Princess Pacquiao encountered the story through her university classmates, who shared it as an example of how genuine humanity still existed in their increasingly digital world. She found herself moved by the unnamed stranger's dignity in accepting help and his gesture of giving something precious in return. The story reminded her of her father's teachings about humility and service, though she had no idea the tale involved him directly. Queen Elizabeth and Michael Pacquiao heard whispered versions of the story from their friends, each iteration emphasizing different aspects: the cold night, the stranger's quiet suffering, the mysterious benefactor who appeared and disappeared like a guardian angel. The children found themselves discussing what they would do in similar situations, their young minds grappling with concepts of privilege and responsibility. The wooden cross had become Manny's constant companion, a tactile reminder of the encounter that had reinforced his deepest beliefs about purpose and service. During training sessions, he would touch it for inspiration, drawing strength from the memory of Isagani's grateful eyes and dignified acceptance of help. The simple piece of wood carried more emotional weight than any trophy or medal he had ever received. Social media posts about the incident continued to multiply, though none mentioned specific names or locations. The story had taken on a life of its own, becoming a symbol of hope that transcended its original circumstances. People began sharing their own experiences of unexpected kindness, creating a wave of positive energy that spread far beyond Baguio's mountain roads. 6 months after that cold night in Baguio, fate orchestrated an encounter that would bring the story full circle in ways neither man could have anticipated. Manny had returned to the mountain city for a charity event at a local school, his heart drawn back to the place where his understanding of true generosity had been deepened by a stranger's quiet dignity. The construction project for the new school wing was nearing completion, and Isagani had been selected as the lead contractor for the final phase, a promotion that stemmed directly from the confidence and improved performance that had followed his encounter with the mysterious stranger months earlier. He wore the leather jacket with pride, though it now carried the honorable wear marks of honest labor and countless acts of kindness extended to others. As Manny toured the construction site with school officials, his eyes immediately found the familiar silhouette of his former jacket. The recognition was instant and overwhelming. The way it fitted perfectly across shoulders, he remembered. The careful way its wearer moved. The same calloused hands that had once offered him a precious wooden cross. Time seemed to pause as their eyes met across the busy construction site. Isagani's face transformed with the same wonder he had shown that cold December night. But now it was tempered with confidence and achievement. The jacket had become more than clothing. It was a symbol of the journey that had led him from that lonely bench to becoming a respected leader in his community. His crew, including workers named Edilberto and Narciso, noticed their supervisor's sudden stillness and followed his gaze with curious respect. Neither man moved immediately toward the other. Instead, they shared a moment of understanding across the distance, each recognizing how much had changed since their first meeting. Manny saw in Isagani's bearing the fulfillment of potential that had been evident even in his lowest moment. Isagani saw in Manny's eyes the same genuine kindness that had transformed his life, now multiplied by knowing the full impact of that simple gesture. When they finally approached each other, the construction site seemed to fade into background noise. Manny noticed how the jacket had aged with dignity, its leather softened by weather and work, but still strong and protective. Isagani had clearly cared for it with the reverence it deserved, maintaining its quality while using it as intended, as shelter and comfort during difficult times. The young contractor reached into his pocket and withdrew the wooden cross, now even more polished from months of handling during moments of prayer and gratitude. But instead of offering it back, he pressed it more firmly into Manny's palm, indicating through gesture that the gift was permanent, a lasting connection between their lives that transcended their brief encounter. Around them, the school construction project hummed with activity as children watched through classroom windows, their faces bright with curiosity about the important visitor examining their new building. Teachers like Marilu and Josefina gathered students who had heard stories about both the famous boxer and the skilled contractor who was completing their school, though none yet understood the connection between these two remarkable men. The charity event proceeded as planned, but the real significance lay in the quiet recognition between two individuals whose lives had been forever altered by a moment of human kindness. As Manny delivered his speech about education and opportunity to the assembled students, his hand rested in his pocket on the familiar wooden cross, drawing strength from its presence. Isagani watched from the construction area, his heart full with gratitude that extended far beyond that single cold night. The jacket around his shoulders carried the warmth of continuing generosity, while the man who had given it to him inspired hundreds of children to believe in the power of education and hard work. The mountain air of Baguio carried with it the same crisp scent of pine trees, but now it also held the satisfaction of a story completed, of kindness multiplied, and of two lives forever connected by the simple truth that genuine compassion creates ripples that never truly end. Thank you for watching another episode of Champion Stories. If you enjoyed today's story, subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss any of our upcoming inspiring tales about Manny Pacquiao. Share your thoughts in the comments. We read every single one, and many times your ideas inspire our next episode. See you next time.